R. Kelly attacked inside prison facility. What if one of the most famous R&B icons of all time wasn't just fighting a prison sentence, but fighting for his life inside the very system meant to guard him? The shocking tale of R. Kelly's alleged poisoning, hidden deals, and silenced witnesses has shattered the line between justice and conspiracy. From secret prison meetings to sworn confessions of murder plots, this is not just another celebrity scandal, it's a war behind bars. Stay with Legends of Black Excellence, hit subscribe, and dive into the truth they never wanted the world to hear. The fall of R. Kelly, a deadly plot behind bars. R. Kelly's journey from chart-topping superstardom to a high-security prison cell has taken a shocking turn that reads more like a crime thriller than a legal case. Once celebrated for redefining R&B in the 1990s, he is now entangled in a web of fear, betrayal, and violence deep within the U.S. penitentiary system. The story begins inside the heavily guarded walls of FCI Butner in North Carolina, where sources close to the case claim that the artist has become the target of a calculated assassination plot. His attorneys insist that what appeared to be an ordinary fainting spell was in fact the latest act in a larger scheme designed to end his life quietly away from public view. Inside those concrete corridors where status and survival define everyday rumors of a bounty on Kelly's head started circulating among inmates months before the alleged attack. Prison insiders describe an atmosphere of hostility toward high-profile offenders, especially those convicted of crimes against minors. According to court filings and affidavits, the plot to eliminate him was not born from prison politics alone, but may have been encouraged by individuals in positions of power. What turned a rumor into reality was the involvement of a figure long feared in the federal system, Michael Glenn Stein, a notorious leader within the Aryan Brotherhood. Stein, incarcerated since the early 1980s for homicide, had built a legacy of control and intimidation that stretched across multiple facilities. By 2023, he was terminally ill with cancer, spending his final years in the medical wing of a Western penitentiary. It was during this period he later claimed in a sworn statement that a senior Bureau of Prisons officer allegedly approached him with an unthinkable proposal: carry out a hit on R. Kelly in exchange for compassionate release. The deal, according to the documents, promised a quiet transfer, manipulated evidence, and eventual disappearance from custody. For a dying man staring at the end, the temptation was both morbid and real. By October 2023, records confirmed that Stein had indeed been relocated to FCI Butner, the same complex where Kelly was housed. He was first placed under medical observation before being moved to a unit adjacent to the singer's cell block. Their whispers grew louder that a mission had been set in motion. Inmates noticed his access to areas normally restricted and his frequent unsupervised movements, privileges almost unheard of for someone with his background. Each day brought him closer to the man he was allegedly sent to silence. Yet behind that hardened exterior, Stein later claimed to have wrestled with guilt and regret. What began as a deadly assignment transformed into a haunting moral reckoning. The tension reached its breaking point when Stein allegedly confronted Kelly face to face and confessed everything: the offer, the promise, and the pressure from inside the system. In that moment, the supposed executioner became the informant, exposing a network of corruption that stretched far beyond cell walls. Whether every detail of his confession proves true remains under investigation, but the implications are grave. The mere suggestion that a federal prisoner could be incentivized to murder another under government watch has shaken public confidence. For R. Kelly, it marked not just another scandal, but the terrifying reality of surviving a system where protection can vanish overnight. The Aryan Brotherhood connection and the BOP's dark deal. The sworn statement given by Michael Glenn Stein has pulled back the curtain on a disturbing web of power manipulation and silent deals operating within the federal prison system. Once regarded as a ruthless figurehead among Aryan Brotherhood circles, Stein found himself fighting a different enemy, terminal cancer, when, according to his declaration, a senior Bureau of Prisons official approached him with an extraordinary proposition: The man's name, he said, was Ray Childress, a veteran officer with a long career managing high-risk inmates. In February 2023, inside the sterile confines of a Colorado Supermax facility, Childress allegedly came to Stein's cell, accompanied by the warden and associate warden Stangl. No guards, no cameras, just a quiet conversation that, as Stein recounts, offered him what every dying prisoner dreams of: freedom in exchange for a final act of violence. In his affidavit, Stein described the meeting as surreal. He claimed Childress laid out a plan straight from hell in which the Bureau would secretly orchestrate the death of R. Kelly, the once celebrated R&B icon, now serving decades for federal sex trafficking convictions. The terms were brutal, but simple: kill Kelly at FCI Butner in North Carolina, stage it as an inmate dispute, and walk away untouched. In return, Childress and the wardens would ensure the evidence vanished, surveillance wiped, reports rewritten, and witnesses silenced. For a man told he had less than a year to live, the offer of stepping outside prison walls even briefly seemed almost divine. Stein later wrote that Childress leaned forward and whispered, "You've done worse for less. Make this your last favor." What gives this testimony weight, investigators noted, is how precisely Stein outlined the chain of command. He didn't describe rogue guards or overheard gossip. He named titles, dates, and the bureaucratic machinery that would allegedly move him from one facility to another. Within weeks, transfer documents confirmed Stein's relocation order to Butner. Officially, it was for medical care. Unofficially, it aligned perfectly with the timeline he provided. The paperwork showed an expedited process, approvals completed in under 48 hours, something almost unheard of in the federal system. That detail alone has fueled speculation that the transfer wasn't routine, but deliberate. According to Stein's account, the logistics of the plot were handled with chilling precision. Once in Butner, he was to be placed in the medical wing until he regained strength, then moved into the same housing unit as Kelly. The method was flexible: a staged brawl, poisoned contraband, or a manufactured medical emergency. Childress allegedly assured him that whatever happens, it won't trace back to you. Even the escape plan sounded rehearsed: a fake disciplinary transfer to another facility, followed by a transport error that would allow him to disappear. The promises of protection, combined with his failing health, painted the scheme as a dark pact between desperation and authority. When the affidavit became public, it ignited outrage across legal circles. If true, it implies not only corruption, but a betrayal of the justice system's most sacred duty: the custody and safety of those it confines. For R. Kelly, it recast his imprisonment from punishment into peril. For the Bureau of Prisons, it raised questions about how far insiders might go to silence a controversial inmate. And for Stein, it immortalized a dying man's confession, a document that, whether believed or not, exposes the frightening possibility that justice itself can be weaponized behind locked doors. The real motive: silencing R. Kelly to hide corruption. Beneath the surface of an alleged murder plot lies a far darker motive, one rooted not in vengeance or prejudice, but in fear of exposure. According to accounts emerging from inside the prison walls, the figure at the center of this storm, Ray Childress, was driven not only by personal contempt, but by a desperate need to suppress damaging information that could unravel years of corruption within the Bureau of Prisons and even the Department of Justice. His disdain for R. Kelly, described in one affidavit as the kind of man who preyed on white girls, served merely as a convenient mask. Behind it, whispers suggest, lay a bureaucratic panic. The imprisoned singer and his legal team were reportedly closing in on proof that senior officials had tampered with the very system meant to punish him. According to filings cited by Kelly's defense investigators, linked to his case, may have secretly recorded privileged phone calls between him and his attorneys, an act that, if verified, would violate the bedrock of attorney-client confidentiality. Those conversations allegedly contained sensitive details about procedural misconduct, from unauthorized wiretaps to suppression of exculpatory evidence. Sources close to the case contend that Kelly's team was preparing to present this material before a federal court exposing misconduct at the highest levels of prosecution and corrections. It was this threat, not merely racial resentment, that supposedly prompted the attempt to silence him once and for all. Within that context, Childress's hostility begins to resemble something more organized, a damage control mission disguised as moral outrage. Parallel to the internal corruption claims ran another quieter operation outside the courtroom, the manipulation of witnesses. Two women, Azriel Clary and LaShonda, stood at the heart of the government's narrative against Kelly. Both had previously maintained close personal ties with him. Both later testified for the prosecution. Kelly's attorneys allege that their reversals were not the result of conscience, but coercion. They claim that government agents used illegally obtained communications, emails, and private messages to confront the women with evidence of his infidelity, igniting betrayal and resentment that could be weaponized in court. For a case built largely on credibility, this shift proved devastating. What might have been a consensual relationship in the public eye was reframed as exploitation in the courtroom. The notion that a federal agency might exploit emotional vulnerability to secure testimony is not new, but in this instance the timing was conspicuously convenient. As Kelly's team intensified their push to review investigative irregularities, both Clary and LaShonda's statements appeared to harden, aligning precisely with the prosecution's timeline. Defense filings suggested a coordinated effort to engineer cooperation through psychological pressure rather than justice. If true, it paints a grim portrait of how power can be exercised not with guns or chains, but with the quiet leverage of personal secrets. For Kelly, already vilified in the media, this web of deception transformed his incarceration into something more sinister, a fight not merely for freedom, but for truth itself. What began as a criminal conviction has evolved into a shadow war between an inmate with nothing left to lose and a system determined to keep its machinery hidden. The accusations may yet be proven or disproven, but they have forced an uncomfortable reckoning with a question larger than any single man. When justice fears exposure, who protects the accused from the enforcers? The hitman's change of heart. Stein confesses the plot. When Michael Glenn Stein arrived at FCI Butner in October 2023, few understood the significance of his transfer. Official paperwork cited medical necessity and act of compassion for a man dying of cancer. Yet the real motive, according to his later testimony, was far more sinister. Behind the facade of bureaucratic routine lay the continuation of a covert operation already set in motion months earlier. Stein, once the most feared inmate in the federal system, carried with him an unspoken order, a contract designed to end R. Kelly's life before inconvenient truths could reach daylight. Butner, known for housing both notorious and vulnerable prisoners, became the stage where corruption, guilt, and mortality collided in one of the strangest chapters of Kelly's long downfall. At first, Stein followed the script laid out by his alleged handlers. He kept his head down, moved quietly through the infirmary, and waited for authorization to join the general population. He later claimed that a senior officer named Lieutenant Teague approached him multiple times, reminding him of his purpose and assuring him that protection was guaranteed once the deed was done. For months, the dying enforcer observed Kelly's movements with the precision of a predator when he ate, when he exercised, even when he prayed. The plan, according to his written statement, was flexible, an altercation staged as self-defense, a poisoned commissary item, or a fatal injury masked as an accident. To everyone else, Stein was simply another terminal inmate fading quietly behind bars. To Teague, he was a weapon running out of time. Yet something unexpected began to change within him. Years of violence had hardened Stein into a man who followed orders without conscience, but proximity to Kelly forced a reckoning he could not suppress. Seeing the singer isolated, stripped of fame and power, he saw a reflection of himself once feared, now forgotten. He began keeping notes, documenting every conversation, every instruction, every coded message passed between officers. The more he wrote, the more he realized the magnitude of what he had been asked to do. By the start of 2025, he claimed the promise of freedom no longer outweighed the cost of dying as a pawn in someone else's cover-up. On April 11, 2025, the tension snapped. Instead of carrying out the attack, Stein approached Kelly directly. What followed, he later recounted, was a conversation that lasted less than 10 minutes, but altered the course of both men's lives. He told Kelly everything: the offer, the officials involved, and the expectation that he would never leave the facility alive after completing the mission. Kelly, stunned but composed, urged him to tell the truth publicly. Within days, Stein contacted his attorney, signed an affidavit, and volunteered to take a polygraph test. For the first time in decades, the man who had built a legacy on silence decided to speak. His confession detonated like a bomb within Butner's walls. Lieutenant Teague allegedly grew furious, demanding that Stein finish what he started. According to the dying inmate's account, the threats intensified until he was forced into protective isolation. In choosing honesty over obedience, Stein had exposed himself to the same danger once reserved for his intended target. The hunter and the hunted had become allies bound by survival. Whatever history will decide about the truth of his claims, one fact remains undisputed on that April morning: a man marked for death instead chose redemption, and a conspiracy built on secrecy began to unravel from within. A second killer recruited poison and cover-up plans. After Michael Glenn Stein's confession shattered the silence inside FCI Butner, the conspiracy did not end, it evolved. What was once a single covert mission to eliminate R. Kelly became a desperate campaign to erase every trace of exposure. By early June 2025, the prison's corridors buzzed with unease. Stein's affidavit had already reached Kelly's attorneys, naming officials and describing in detail how he was recruited. Word of that betrayal spread quickly, and according to later testimony, senior staff were determined to clean up what they saw as a dangerous mess. In the shadows of that growing scandal emerged a new figure: David Keith Harris, another member of the Aryan Brotherhood reputed for his loyalty and his history of carrying out violent orders without hesitation. Unlike Stein, Harris was not terminally ill. He was younger, stronger, and far less complicated to control. According to allegations contained in new legal filings, Lieutenant Teague approached him directly inside the recreation yard, presenting a grim proposition. Stein had broken the code Teague allegedly warned, and now 2 lives needed to be taken to restore order. The instructions were methodical and cold. Both targets, Stein and Kelly, were to die quietly poisoned through the food line or commissary snacks. Teague reportedly told Harris that a small dose mixed into pre-packaged items would trigger a reaction severe enough to look like a medical event. In a facility already known for chronic health emergencies, it would blend seamlessly into routine chaos. At first, Harris played along, pretending to accept the mission while carefully noting every detail. He later described the meeting as one of the most surreal experiences of his incarceration, an officer plotting murder within earshot of other inmates. What disturbed him most was the indifference. Teague spoke of killing 2 men as though it were a matter of paperwork, not human lives. Harris claimed that when he hesitated, Teague sweetened the offer with promises of reduced time in segregation and increased commissary privileges. To an inmate living under strict control, such rewards could mean survival. Still, the moral weight of what he was being asked to do proved too heavy. He refused to participate in what he called a state-sanctioned execution disguised as punishment. Choosing conscience over compliance was not without consequence. Harris knew that rejecting Teague's demand might brand him a liability within both the gang and the administration. Yet instead of staying silent, he reached out to Kelly's legal team through a written statement smuggled out of the facility. That document mirrored Stein's earlier allegations almost perfectly. Same names, same methods, same threat pattern. It was the confirmation Kelly's attorneys needed to argue that a coordinated campaign against their client existed within the Bureau of Prisons itself. The testimony provided critical evidence for an emergency motion filed in federal court days later, seeking immediate protection for both men. For a brief moment, Harris and Stein, two men molded by violence, became unlikely symbols of defiance. Their separate decisions to speak out exposed a pattern of institutional rot that few had dared to confront. Whether the government ultimately proves these claims false or substantiates them through investigation, the moral question lingers: how did a federal officer come to recruit convicts as assassins inside an American penitentiary for R? Kelly already struggling against the weight of his convictions. This revelation deepened his ordeal, transforming his imprisonment from a sentence into a struggle for survival against forces far more dangerous than fellow inmates, the very system charged with keeping him alive. Emergency motion filed. Lawyers demand R. Kelly's release. On the morning of June 10, 2025, the legal battle surrounding R. Kelly reached a new level of urgency. His attorney, Beau Brindley, filed an emergency motion in federal court in Chicago, describing what he called a credible and immediate threat to human life. The 86-page filing, dense with exhibits and sworn declarations, sought to remove Kelly from FCI Butner and place him under monitored home confinement. Brindley's motion was not based on speculation, but on two legally binding affidavits, one from Michael Glenn Stein, the dying Aryan Brotherhood leader, who claimed he had been sent to kill the singer, and another from David Keith Harris, who said a prison officer tried to recruit him for a follow-up poisoning plot. Together, their accounts painted a portrait of a federal system so compromised that incarceration itself had become a death sentence. In the motion, Brindley argued that multiple Bureau of Prisons officials' names withheld for safety had orchestrated an operation to eliminate his client. The filing detailed Stein's testimony describing a transfer scheme, secret meetings, and a promise of freedom in exchange for murder, while Harris's statement corroborated those claims with new allegations of attempted poisoning under direct supervision of staff. According to the court document, these converging testimonies demonstrated a deliberate and sustained effort by federal actors to silence a prisoner whose ongoing legal claims threaten exposure of systemic misconduct. To underscore the gravity, Brindley attached copies of verified transfer logs showing Stein's move from Arizona to North Carolina, proving that at least part of the alleged plan was factually accurate. The motion requested immediate judicial intervention, a court-ordered relocation, independent medical evaluation, and the appointment of a special investigator to examine the Bureau's conduct. Brindley warned that without action, Kelly's life would remain in unmistakable jeopardy. He emphasized that both Stein and Harris had agreed to take polygraph tests and testify publicly if necessary. These men have nothing to gain but their souls, the filing read, and everything to lose by speaking against the system that controls them. The document also included a timeline of events dating back to October 2023, aligning transfer records, disciplinary notes, and hospital reports to illustrate the consistency of the narrative. Each entry was meticulously footnoted, an attempt to prove that the defense was not relying on rumor, but on verifiable facts. Within 48 hours, the motion drew a fiery response from prosecutors representing the Department of Justice. They called the allegations a carnival of fantasy and accused Kelly's defense team of manipulating public sympathy to circumvent sentencing. A spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney's Office said the claims were entirely unsubstantiated and insulting to the integrity of federal institutions. In their rebuttal brief, prosecutors dismissed Stein and Harris as unreliable narrators, career criminals with motives to fabricate stories in exchange for leniency or attention. The filing urged the court to deny the motion outright, warning that granting it would invite every high-profile inmate to concoct similar tales of corruption. Still, the submission achieved what no appeal or retrial motion had managed. It forced the court to confront whether a federal prisoner could be unsafe under government supervision. Public reaction was explosive, with commentators split between skepticism and alarm. Even though the judge declined to rule immediately, the hearing illuminated deep cracks within the Bureau of Prisons' accountability. For Kelly, the emergency motion was more than a legal maneuver. It was a lifeline, A desperate attempt to prove that the walls meant to confine him had instead become instruments of silence. June 13, 2025. The alleged poisoning of R. Kelly. The morning of June 13, 2025 began like any other inside the restricted unit of FCI Butner, until R. Kelly collapsed on the cold concrete floor of his solitary cell. According to subsequent filings, the singer had awoken feeling lightheaded and disoriented. Moments later, he saw black spots tried to stand, then crumpled to the ground. Guards discovered him unconscious near the cell door and called for emergency transport. By mid-morning, he was en route to Duke University Hospital in Durham, North Carolina, barely responsive. What initially appeared to be a fainting episode soon revealed symptoms of something far more alarming. Physicians ran toxicology screens and discovered unusually high concentrations of sedatives and anti-anxiety medication in his bloodstream levels that, according to medical notes later obtained by his legal team, could induce respiratory failure in a man of his age and weight. At Duke, attending doctors also identified a network of blood clots forming in both legs and within the pulmonary arteries. These findings were particularly troubling because Kelly's known medical file listed a history of clotting disorders for which he had previously been prescribed anticoagulants. His lawyer, Beau Brinley, claimed that prison officials had recently discontinued those prescriptions without explanation. When combined with the overdose-level sedatives, the condition was described as potentially lethal. The treating physician recommended immediate surgery followed by a week of in-hospital monitoring. Yet according to Brinley's affidavit, no such care was allowed to proceed. Within hours of the diagnosis, armed BOP personnel entered the recovery ward and insisted that the patient be discharged back to federal custody, despite the attending physician's written objection that further movement could precipitate pulmonary embolism and death. The decision to remove Kelly against medical advice ignited outrage among his defense team. Brinley accused the Bureau of orchestrating an intentional poisoning designed to appear as a medical complication. He asserted that Kelly had been administered his nightly medication by an unfamiliar officer the evening before the collapse and was instructed to take an additional dose from a separate cup. Surveillance footage from the unit was later requested, but according to the defense was reported as unavailable due to technical issues. Brinley argued this timing was no coincidence. The supposed overdose occurred just 3 days after his emergency motion exposing the alleged murder plot was filed in court. In his public statement, he declared, "This was not an accident. It was retribution for telling the truth." Inside the hospital, staff members reportedly whispered their disbelief. One nurse, in a statement to investigators, recounted overhearing a prison transport officer remark, "This will open a can of worms." Despite medical warnings, Kelly was placed on a stretcher, shackled and driven back to Butner under heavy guard. His removal violated standard post-operative protocol, a point later corroborated by an internal hospital memorandum that surfaced in legal filings. Upon return, he was confined once more to isolation, no visitors, no communication, no transparency. The BOP released a brief note stating that the transfer was routine and that the inmate's condition was stable, but refused to comment further, citing privacy regulations. For Kelly, the incident deepened his nightmare. What began as imprisonment had turned into a relentless battle for survival fought from within a cell that seemed increasingly like a trap. For Brinley, it reinforced the defense's claim that his client was living under an orchestrated campaign of silencing. And for the doctors who had examined him, it left an indelible question hanging in the sterile air of Duke Hospital. How could a man be treated for near-fatal poisoning and then marched back into the very place where it had begun? Government response and court rejection. In the wake of the dramatic hospital episode and the explosive allegations that followed, the legal and political machinery moved swiftly to contain the storm. Within days, the Department of Justice issued a formal response rejecting every claim of conspiracy and abuse within the prison system. The face of that rebuttal was Jason Julian, a federal prosecutor known for his blunt precision and uncompromising courtroom demeanor. Standing before reporters in Chicago, Julian dismissed the notion of a coordinated plot against R. Kelly, as a fabrication so elaborate it borders on fiction. He argued that the affidavits from Stein and Harris lacked verifiable evidence and were riddled with contradictions, calling them jailhouse tales designed to manipulate public sympathy. For the prosecution, the idea that a federal institution would orchestrate a murder-for-hire scheme was not just implausible, it was an affront to the integrity of the justice system itself. Julian's written response to the emergency motion was equally scathing. In a 32-page brief submitted to the U.S. District Court, he accused defense attorney Beau Brindley of weaponizing sensationalism. The filing argued that Kelly's legal team was attempting to convert unsubstantiated rumors into grounds for judicial intervention. Julian emphasized that there was no credible evidence connecting any Bureau of Prisons employee to a plan of harm, nor any medical documentation confirming deliberate poisoning. Every fact presented by the defense, he wrote, is circumstantial and speculative, lacking the foundation necessary for court consideration. His tone was unmistakably dismissive, describing the conspiracy claims as fanciful stories meant to blur the reality of serious and repeated criminal conduct. Presiding over the motion was Judge Martha Mako, a jurist recognized for her restraint and adherence to procedural boundaries. After reviewing the arguments, she issued her ruling on June 20, 2025, denying Kelly's emergency petition without holding an evidentiary hearing. In her written order, Mako explained that the court lacked jurisdiction to alter the terms of confinement, and that the material submitted failed to meet the threshold of credible evidence required for extraordinary relief. She added that decisions regarding inmate safety and transfer fell within the purview of the Bureau of Prisons, not the judiciary. While acknowledging the seriousness of the allegations, she concluded that unverified statements by fellow inmates do not constitute proof of constitutional violation. Her concise, measured language reflected both caution and finality, signaling that the judiciary would not be drawn into speculation. Outside the courthouse, the ruling sparked a wave of polarized reactions. Supporters of Kelly condemned the decision as proof of institutional bias, accusing the government of prioritizing image over accountability. Hashtags like Protect R. Kelly and Prison Justice trended across social media platforms, with fans posting messages questioning how a man could suffer medical emergencies under state supervision without consequence. On the other side, critics viewed the motion as yet another ploy by a disgraced celebrity to escape punishment. Editorials in national newspapers framed the story as a test of credibility between convicted criminal and the system he defied. For many observers, it became less about facts and more about which narrative they chose to believe. In the end, the government's rebuttal and Judge Mako's decision reasserted official control over an unraveling public drama. Yet the unanswered questions lingered. Why did the toxicology reports show abnormal drug levels? And why had Kelly been removed from Duke Hospital so abruptly? The court's dismissal may have closed the legal door, but it could not silence the growing debate. For Kelly Brindley and the millions watching, the ruling was not an end, but another reminder of how truth and power collide in a system that rarely allows both to prevail. Inside prison hierarchy, why R. Kelly is a target. Behind the towering fences and razor wire of America's federal prisons lies an unwritten code far more brutal than any statute. Life behind bars is governed by hierarchy, a ruthless social order where respect is currency and reputation determines survival. At the very bottom of that order sit those convicted of sexual offenses, especially crimes involving minors. Within this subterranean justice system, men labeled as predators are stripped not only of status, but of basic humanity. For R. Kelly, whose convictions centered on sexual exploitation, that stigma became both a sentence and a target. Inmates in nearly every facility maintain what they call the Convicts Code, a creed that condones violence against those deemed irredeemable. It is a system of retribution that operates parallel to official authority, where justice is often delivered through fists, shanks, or poisoned food rather than due process. The hostility towards such offenders is reinforced by a twisted sense of morality among prisoners. Murderers, drug traffickers, and armed robbers often justify their actions as business or survival, but crimes against children cross an invisible line even among the condemned. The belief that harming a child molester restores honor is disturbingly widespread, handed down through prison lore as a form of vigilante righteousness. Guards rarely intervene aggressively unless serious injury or death occurs, seeing these attacks as a grim but predictable outcome. For celebrities like Kelly, the problem intensifies. Fame amplifies resentment. Notoriety brings envy. To other inmates, he is not merely a disgraced musician, but the embodiment of arrogance and betrayal, a man whose downfall symbolizes the collapse of privilege inside a place built to erase it. That volatile dynamic exploded into reality on August 26, 2020, while Kelly was being held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in Chicago. According to incident reports, an inmate named Jeremiah Shane Farmer, a member of the Latin Kings gang, broke away from an assigned work detail and entered Kelly's cell unprovoked. He attacked the singer while he was sleeping, striking repeatedly to the head and torso before guards managed to subdue him with pepper spray. Kelly sustained bruises and minor cuts, but required no hospitalization. Though the assault lasted less than a minute, it left a psychological mark that would shape his behavior for years to come. Immediately after, he was placed in solitary confinement for his own protection, a measure that paradoxically deepened his isolation and fear. Farmer's own explanation for the attack added another sinister dimension. In a handwritten motion submitted to the court, he claimed that MCC staff had taunted him during a counseling session, suggesting that someone should go handle the pedophile in cell block E. He alleged that officers not only encouraged but enabled the assault by allowing him to roam unsupervised. While federal authorities dismissed his statement as delusional, the claim echoed long-standing concerns about prison culture, how staff bias and casual cruelty can translate into violence by proxy. Whether Farmer acted on direct instruction or internalized hatred, the outcome was the same: an inmate punished outside of law by those who considered themselves enforcers of an unspoken moral order. Sociological studies back this pattern. Surveys by the Bureau of Justice Statistics reveal that over 40% of assaults on inmates convicted of sexual crimes are motivated by what aggressors describe as moral duty. It is violence rationalized as purification, and it thrives because it aligns with the most primitive instincts of revenge. For R. Kelly, such animosity ensured that every day behind bars carried the risk of another ambush. His fame offered no shield; if anything, it made him more visible, more despised. In the dark logic of prison society, where retribution masquerades as ethics, his celebrity became not an armor but an invitation to bleed. Family speaks out: faith, doubt, and silence. In the aftermath of months of scandal, courtroom filings, and whispered allegations, the only voices that still spoke with unwavering conviction belonged to R. Kelly's family. While lawyers battled in courtrooms and federal agents denied wrongdoing, his relatives, those who had known him before the headlines, stood as the last defense of his humanity. Gregory Preston, Kelly's uncle, was among the first to address the public following the news of his hospitalization. Standing outside his modest home in Chicago, Preston expressed disbelief at how far his nephew had fallen in the eyes of the nation. He described the R&B singer he once knew not as a monster, but as a man deeply flawed, manipulated, and misunderstood. "He's my blood," Preston said in an interview, "and I know his heart. He doesn't deserve to die in there." His tone mixed anger and grief, reflecting a family forced to watch a loved one fade under the weight of both judgment and isolation. For the Preston and Kelly families, the ordeal had become a generational wound. The uncle spoke of nights spent praying for protection, of phone calls unanswered, and of rumors that made their way to neighborhood porches long before the truth did. To him, the legal chaos surrounding R. Kelly was less about guilt and innocence and more about power, who held it and who suffered under it. He insisted that the government had turned his nephew into a symbol of corruption to deflect from its own failures. When they can't fix the system, he told reporters, they destroy someone inside it. His words echoed the frustration of many relatives of incarcerated men who see their family members not as villains, but as casualties of machinery too large to fight. Bruce Kelly, R. Kelly's older brother, added a quieter but equally emotional voice. Having faced his own legal battles, Bruce understood the prison environment that now threatened his sibling's life. In a rare radio interview, he admitted that watching R. Kelly's decline hurt to the soul. He described the pain of seeing the world mock someone he had once performed with, calling it a slow funeral in public. Yet even as he struggled to reconcile the accusations with the man he remembered, Bruce refused to surrender his faith in redemption. "I don't excuse everything he's done," he said, "but I don't believe he's what they say he is either." His comments revealed a conflict between brotherly love and the undeniable gravity of the crimes, a tension that mirrored the divided opinion of the public itself. As the controversy deepened, the family's appeals for compassion were met with skepticism. Supporters saw them as the last honest witnesses to a tragedy of injustice, while critics accused them of blindness and denial. The truth, as always, seemed trapped somewhere in between. What united both sides was exhaustion, a recognition that the case had long since ceased to be about one man and had become a reflection of America's uneasy relationship with fame, morality, and punishment. The saga blurred the boundaries between victim and villain until neither label fit comfortably. The video that chronicled these events closed on a somber note, acknowledging the ambiguity that had defined the story from the beginning. It posed a haunting question rather than an answer. Was R. Kelly truly the target of a conspiracy, or the architect of his own downfall? As the screen faded to black narration, reminded viewers that within systems built on secrecy, certainty is a luxury no one can afford. Whether history remembers him as a persecuted man or a condemned one, the echoes of his name will linger not in court records or headlines, but in the uneasy silence left behind when truth and belief no longer meet. In the end, the story of R. Kelly remains suspended between guilt and persecution, fact and fear. His rise and downfall expose not only the fragility of fame, but also the shadows within justice itself. Whether he was silenced by corruption or haunted by his own sins may never be proven. Yet his case forces us to question how power decides who deserves protection and who deserves pain. At Legends of Black Excellence, we leave the final judgment to you. Was R. Kelly a fallen legend or a victim of a system that thrives on destruction?